Albert Einstein, Richard Branson, Bill Gates, John F. Kennedy, Tony Robbins, Michael Phelps, Will Smith. That sounds like a list of highly successful titans in a variety of industries. What else do they have in common? Well, they all have ADHD, but you don't hear much about that, do you? You know what you hear even less about? The successful women navigating ADHD. And that's exactly why I started this podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka. I'm an attorney, not a doctor, a lifelong student, not a coach. I'm also the creator of Cortography, a patent-pending system that helps people like you figure out what they should do with their life. And we're here today to talk ADHD, your superpowers, your symptoms, your workarounds, and how you proudly stand out instead of trying to fit in. I credit my ADHD for some of my greatest superpowers. And you know what? I spy a happier life for you too. So without further ado, a shiny new episode is starting now. Hello, I am Tracy Otsuka. Welcome to episode 45 of ADHD for Smartass Women. Today, I have invited Emma Elizabeth Megan to our podcast. She doesn't like the name Emma, so we're going to call her Em. Em is 27. She lives outside of London. She is an MMA fighter, and yes, you got that right. Mixed martial arts. She also has a master's in psychology. Welcome to our podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women.
Thank you, Tracy.
I am so delighted to have you here, Em. I want our listeners to know what a struggle it's been.
Oh, goodness.
To get you here with good audio. This is the second time I am recording this podcast. And the good news is it allowed me some time. So we ended up getting audio drift. Not that I ever knew what audio drift was before, but our tracks didn't match and there was a lot of popping and it just didn't sound good. And I just thought that what Em shared with me was so important that we had to re-record it and really make sure that the audio was good quality so everybody could hear all your wise words of wisdom. So I'm so appreciative, Em, that you've stuck it out with me, that you're back. We just spent another half an hour trying to make sure that the microphones worked. So you're probably done. But again, thank you so much for being here with us here today. And clearly you're here to talk to us about bipolar disorder. Yeah. What I would love to do is I'd love to start with your story. And although I'll ask you some questions about your childhood, because I'm always interested in that, as it plays into ADHD, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to start when kind of everything, went off the rails for you. And it sounds to me like that was the minute you got to college. So Can we start with your story there?
Of course. So, we briefly, as you had spoke about that earlier, but essentially the story was that when I went to university, so I moved away from home. So that was the first time I'd lived on my own. And I was kind of away from all of the friends and everything that I'd had when I was younger. And everything was kind of fine, but obviously trying to manage different things, so manage my own workload and not sleeping very much and going out, maybe drinking more than I was before, lots of work, trying to fit everything in, staying up really late to write essays and stuff. So it coped quite well for a little while, and then very slowly, as everything kind of piled up with coursework and stuff, I just started to feel quite low, and it got to the point where I was kind of getting quite concerned, to the point I went to see the doctor on campus and just said, I don't feel quite right, I just feel really my mood is really low. I feel quite miserable, just not really myself. And they were like, we think you might have kind of an episode of depression. So we're going to put you on some medication. They put me on 10 milligrams, I think it was. So a subtherapeutic dose to start off with of citalopram, which is an SSRI. And then within a week of being on that medication, I had a meeting with a kind of support person, because obviously where I was at university, I was away from family and friends and anybody to kind of keep an eye and just see I was all right. I checked in with them, and the care person, the care coordinator, just looked at me and said, "Oh my goodness, like this is completely different to what we were expecting, completely different to what you were like a week ago." So I was kind of quite bouncing off the walls, talking extremely fast, felt really kind of spaced out. And I've never felt like that before ever in my life. Like, it was just a really strange feeling. And they just called in the psychiatrist that was in the kind of building at the time, and just it was under that care team, and they just said, yeah, like, we think it's a bipolar disorder, we don't think it's a depression. Like, if this tablet has made you like this, then clearly it's not a depression, it's a bipolar disorder.
So what they literally did was they took how you behaved on this medication and said it's bipolar disorder. They never considered that maybe it was the medication that was causing this behavior.
Well, I've never had, obviously, for me trying to remember, it was such a long time ago now, but I don't ever remember them sitting down and doing a thorough assessment going, right, so have you ever felt like this in the past? Have you ever had reactions to medication in the past? Have you ever had psychiatric medication in the past? Like, none of those questions were really asked to me. It was just kind of like, have you had low periods before? I was like, well, everybody's had low periods, right? This is the first time I've been to a doctor to say that, so clearly not really. But yeah, that was, well, you're not, this isn't just a depressive episode, like, this isn't normal depression, like, we need to deal with this. So they took me immediately off of the antidepressant and put me onto a mood stabilizer, and then I was just put through so many different kind of medications trying to fix it that wasn't there.
Yeah. So, Em, what happened then when they took you off of the antidepressant and they put you on the mood stabilizer?
So I've been on so many different mood stabilizers over the past, because this happened when I was 18 and now I'm like 27. So, and I've only kind of worked all this out in the past year and a half and brought all this kind of to everyone's attention and worked with my own psychiatrist and kind of stopped that process from happening. But it was kind of like put on one mood stabilizer, and then
Did you get worse? I mean,
yeah.
when they put you on the first one, okay. So every single one, it seemed you got worse.
Yeah, so it was either worse or different. It was never just, when you compare it to what it was like before I was on any medication, it was never that again, if that makes sense, because I was put on one medication and then it would be like, oh, so this makes me feel like a zombie, or this makes her normal, even though I should have been normal as a baseline anyway, we now realise. But then it would be, oh, there's this side effect, so we'll give you this medication to treat this side effect, which then gives you this side effect. And then it's just a never ending cycle of medication that doesn't need to be there. Yeah.
So what happened after that? So they're just switching you from one medication to another, and you're feeling worse and worse over time?
Yeah. So, and obviously at the same time, then having to come to the thought of, I'm 18 years old and I have bipolar disorder. So me being me, and now also realizing that I have ADHD, was like, oh, so what's that? And I need to know everything about that so I can just know what it is and I can help myself, because that's what I do. And I didn't realize that's why I did it, but that's what I do. So I kind of looked into it and was just completely, in a way, I don't think that helped at all, because I was just so scared. I was like, I'm going to have this condition for the rest of my life, and everyone was telling me, you can't do anything about it, you just need to get up and get on with it. And it's very difficult, because when I eventually finished university, I did actually end up in hospital. I was just hit a really low period. Obviously, I'd managed to push myself through my exams. The doctors turned around and said, you should quit. Like, my parents were like, you need to leave. Like, you shouldn't be at university. You need to look after your health. And I ended up graduating first class honours. So I did that. And then I came home, and I just wasn't coping, because obviously I then had to deal with migrating back home when having been away for 3 years and with all of this stress on top. So I did end up in a unit for a week or so, which again doesn't really fit with a bipolar diagnosis. Like, if you're a bipolar and you're that if you're having that severe an episode that you do need to go to hospital, you'd be there for weeks, months at a time. But because I was then obviously moving around the country, it was just being passed from one doctor to another. This patient has bipolar disorder. So nobody would have thought to go, oh, we'll do a reassessment of that. So that never, ever, ever happened. And then, and everyone was going, there's something not quite right about your diagnosis, but nobody ever thought to look into it. And then, yeah, so I was on and out of medication, and then just the management side of it, like, is so different to the way you should manage an ADHD. So it was kind of like, I was told by doctors I shouldn't be working because it would be too much, and I shouldn't be doing this and I shouldn't be doing that, which are all the things that I should be doing because I have ADHD. So essentially, it was just making things worse. Like, apart from sleep hygiene, which I learned and taught myself with thinking that I was bipolar, which is massively, massively helped, everything else has just been completely wrong.
So, did you from the beginning feel this sense of discomfort with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder? I mean, were you thinking, I don't think they're right? Or, I mean, you're 18, right?
Yeah.
Did you just kind of buy off on it and say, okay, that's what I have?
Yeah, to be honest, it took me a very long time to start going, this doesn't fit, because when they first gave it to me, I knew nothing about it. I was just like, all I knew about bipolar disorder was that they have these episodes where they feel they have lots of energy and they're really high, and then they have these episodes where they get low and miserable. And that was the basis of my knowledge of bipolar. So, and I was thinking, well, I feel a bit different to everybody else. I have these parts where I get really buzzy and hyper, and recently I've been having these bits where I get really miserable and depressed. So for me, it made sense at the time for them to turn around and say, this is what I had.
Right.
And then,
however, you were on medication the whole time, right?
Pardon?
You were on this bipolar medication the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. So I was medicated the whole time. I'm still technically on a anti-anxiety tablet and a very, very low dose of a mood stabilizer at the moment, just because they're trying to get me off of all of that medication. And because I've been on a mood stabilizer for such a long time, when they were talking about putting me on ADHD medication, they wanted to leave it there as a buffer, just to ensure that nothing else happens in the meantime, because I've had it in my system for such a long time.
Absolutely.
So
what happened then? So, okay, so you ended up in the hospital, but then after that, you ended up getting a master's in psychology, right? I just want to make sure I have the timing right.
Yeah. So, I got my law degree, then I was in hospital. And that was to say, they were telling me that I couldn't work, that I couldn't do this, couldn't do that. And I wanted to know more about psychology. I wanted to understand it more. Then that's basically the main reason I did my master's, was to kind of understand better what
That
was
is
going
so
on.
ADHD.
So yeah, I did. It was what they call a conversion course. So because I had a bachelor's in law, so because you already have a bachelor's, it doesn't matter what subject it's in. It was a years and a half's course where I could, like, it was like a condensed master's program in a year and a half. So rather than doing a 3-year program, you do it all in a year and a half, and they give you the qualifying modules to get your master's degree in psychology. So I did that, and I met some amazing people on that course that had children that had autism and ADHD, and had partners that had bipolar disorder. So for me, it was not only the course, but also the people that I met just gave me a lot broader kind of spectrum of kind of conditions that could affect your brain, and could be this and could be that. So,
but even though you went through that whole program, you still came out of it not ever really considering that you might have ADHD.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So tell me what happened with your boyfriend.
So
how did you come to consider ADHD?
So it was kind of, obviously with my boyfriend it started first, but it was kind of, everything just kind of came together in the same process of about 4 or 5 months. So with my boyfriend, I met him 3 years ago, and I think I remember I said this to you last time I spoke with you. I said he is, as soon as I moved in with him, he's textbook ADHD. He was that. As soon as you start living with him, it was, I am that guy that is in the classroom that doesn't shut up, that doesn't stop moving. He was just, and unfortunately for us girls that have it, it's like for males, it's a lot more textbook. It is a lot more like you can just tick everything off, like the generic stereotypical traits. And I was like, and my stepbrother, who I didn't really spend an awful lot of time with, but he's younger than me, he has diagnosed ADD at the time. So I was like, I know it from a textbook point of view, and I know it from kind of a little bit of interaction point of view as well. So I was like, okay. And then approached him with it, and he was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm over 30 years old. I don't have ADHD. And then very, very slowly kind of got round to the idea of him speaking to somebody about it. He went through a lot of stress and didn't obviously have the strategies in place to deal with it. And then I kind of got him to speak to a doctor, and then he got referred pretty much immediately and got a diagnosis within about 3 or 4 months, which is absolutely, if anyone knows the UK NHS system, is just very, very quick. Yes. And he was medicated, started stimulant medication last Christmas. So he's been on stimulant medication now for nearly a year. So that was with him. But then with me, alongside that at the same time.
So you went through all of this with your stepbrother?
No, this was my boyfriend. This is what happened with him. So after I moved in with him, I managed to get him to go to a doctor and then get assessed for ADHD.
Wait, I'm confused though. So the story you just told us, was that your stepbrother or his stepbrother?
No, it was him.
Oh, it was him. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. So initially you came to him and said, I think this is textbook classic ADHD. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
But he came around over time.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you were doing all kinds of research about him.
Yeah.
And then at what point did you say, oh my gosh, I think this is me?
Yeah. So that was, I say, about the same time alongside of that. I'd been seeing the same psychiatrist for about 3 or 4 years, like on and off, just when I needed to see her.
Still thinking you had bipolar?
Yeah, still with the same diagnosis. Okay. But she'd known me for quite an extended period of time now, for about 3 or 4 years. Like, not seen me very often, but the longest I'd stayed with a particular psychiatrist, long enough to kind of go, I don't think this quite fits. And she, just before he got his diagnosis, just kind of said, I got a letter from her saying, I don't think this is bipolar disorder. Like, you don't present symptoms of bipolar disorder.
Wow.
And so I gave
And had you considered that before, Em, or was it once you got the letter that you really started to think that there's something wrong here?
Well, for me, it was just kind of like, I knew I was still struggling with certain things, and I was just like, I don't know. Like, I don't think I've got bipolar, or if I do have bipolar, I'm so in control of it, which you're not supposed to be with bipolar. It's just so sporadic and unpredictable. Like, you can't really know what's going to trigger an episode necessarily with bipolar. You can try and manage it, but you don't know. So for me, I was like, I'm over handling this incredibly well, which I don't see how, or the drugs that I've been on for 10 years that have never really made any difference have suddenly started to work, or it's something else. So I was looking, obviously, as you say, for my boyfriend, into ADHD. And I didn't think ADHD first off. I was thinking, right, what am I still struggling with? What is still the problem? And it was mainly my anxiety. So I was like, and if you can bring everything that I struggle with back down to anxiety, and I don't have social anxiety, I don't have generalized anxiety, I don't have phobias. Like, I was like, so what is this anxiety that I have? And did a lot of research with that, and started off actually with autism. And then I was like, some of this fits, some of this doesn't. And then, as I say, when I was kind of looking at my stuff and looking at my boyfriend's stuff, I noticed that they were explaining how differently females present with ADHD. And they were saying a lot of it does present as anxiety, and about how we learn to fit in better. So people don't pick up on the textbook symptoms and things like that. And so I was thinking, okay, and I started to read around more of this, and it's just the more I read, the more kind of answers I had. And then I just came across this article that I sent you, that was just, it basically explained the difference between bipolar mood swings and ADHD mood changes. I kind of like in black and
That was
white.
the Attitude article?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and we're going to post that in the show notes, just
Yeah.
so our listeners know.
But yeah, that was just literally, because that was the only thing left that I hadn't explained, was like, why am I getting these mood shifts? And if I haven't got bipolar, why are they happening? Like, why am I getting like really low and like really like feeling really rubbish, and then feeling really like excited and happy and like buzzy all the time? And then I looked at it and I was just like, this explains it. I was like, the difference between those two, it is definitely ADHD mood changes that I'm having and not bipolar. So I called my psychiatrist and I said, look, I think I have something along these lines. Like, can we have a chat about it? And she said, right, I know what you're like. So she said, next time you come and see me, I want you to bring your case to me for the fact that you have ADHD. So I said, okay. And then I met with her, and she's a really good psychiatrist, actually. She's retired now, but she didn't never talk to me like I was a patient. She just kind of chatted to me and listened to like what I had to say rather than telling me what was what. And then she just said, she said, I can't diagnose you because of the kind of team that she was with. She dealt with mood disorders. But she said, but I completely agree with you. And she sent a letter back to my GP and just said, look, I think this is an organic disorder. It's not bipolar. I think that she should get assessed for ADHD. And then I ended up going and getting a private diagnosis because the NHS waiting list was 18 months to 2 years.
Wow.
So, but that was by a specialist ADHD kind of psychiatrist. And then after that, I have been referred back, and that has all been kind of changed in my notes. I guess it's all, you have ADHD and not bipolar disorder, and they're trying to help me with that.
So I guess this is another example of the patient, and usually it tends to be a woman, doing the research, going back to the doctors and educating them on ADHD.
Yeah,
right?
Unfortunately.
So you had never presented before with manic symptoms or even depressive symptoms?
Not
prior to being put on this medication? I'm talking about the depression medication.
No, never ever anything manic. Not for an extensive period of time. So like, when looking back on it, it could have been not the episode I had once I had the medication, and that was a completely different thing. But I do understand how, if you see a snapshot of somebody with ADHD who is highly emotional for like 10 minutes, that could be, if you saw a snapshot of that, how that could present to a doctor as mania or hypermania.
Right.
But the difference being is that that's over within half an hour. Whereas if a patient is manic, that is not what happens. It's just continuous for whatever reason. And it's all based on environment and stress factors. Whereas with me, when I was taken into hospital, I was presenting as manic at that point because I didn't sleep for 7 days because of this medication that was going on. So anybody, even a neurotypical person after 7 days of not sleeping would be presenting as manic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as soon as they put me into the hospital, like after 24 hours, I fell asleep. And as soon as I like recovered from that, like I was calm and they let me go home. Whereas with somebody with bipolar, it wouldn't matter where you put that person. Unfortunately, they're suffering from a manic episode, and you just have to wait for it to be over. And as I say, I've never been that low mood and depressed that I went to ask anybody for help until that particular occasion. So I've never had any kind of symptoms of bipolar until the doctor turned around and told me that I had it when I was 18.
Well, and the other thing that I know you mentioned last time, but you didn't bring up this time, is when you started as a freshman, having to deal with all these, we typically, those of us with ADHD, struggle, making the adjustment from, the comfort of our family life, high school, to college. And you also had a roommate, I think you said, that had a stroke in the middle of all this.
Yeah, so we had quite a stressful time at university. As much as I had a great time, but we had a lot of drama. So we had like, my housemate had a stroke, and we had to we found her in first year, like she had a stroke, and we called an ambulance for her, and the doctors were trying to tell us that it wasn't, and we were like, why do you have all these adverts on TV telling us what a stroke is if you're not going to believe us when we tell you she's having a stroke? And yeah, it was just I understand a lot of people have drama in their university life, but it was just a lot of things that obviously I've heard this about ADHD in general. I don't know how true it is, but I know it's quite true for me. We're quite good in a crisis. So people come to us with crisis. So yeah, obviously it was a lot of things going on, and that was another stress on top of the change of routine and all these new things and trying to fit them into boxes and staying up and all of this sort of stuff. It was just a lot of new and not a lot of organizing, if that makes sense.
So, Em, clearly the audio gods are not going to be with us for this recording. We literally just got shut down again in the middle of, I think I had asked about your roommate having a stroke. So was there anything else that you wanted to wrap up there?
No, not really. All that I thought about that we did mention last time, which I hadn't brought up about moving away as well, which may have made the low mood come on with me, was the fact that when I moved away to university, I completely stopped exercising.
Yeah.
So I've trained martial arts since I was 7 or 8 years old. And when I was about 16, 17, when I was in college and end of school, I was training about 4 times a week classes and running most mornings and doing stuff at school and college as well. And then when I moved to study away at university, it was kind of, I didn't see that as important, and it wasn't the same as when I was back home. So I just got completely out of the routine of doing it. And I don't think that helped at all.
Yeah, no, our brains really need exercise and respond really well to it. And I have this theory for those of us that really struggle on medication, exercise seems to work exceptionally well. And I don't know if that's true or not. You know, it might be that we don't know what people who can take medication, it works really well, what that even feels like. So, the exercise, wow.
Yeah, I think just generally speaking, like every brain needs exercise, like at different levels. But for me, like we did mention this last time, but just saying about how when everything kind of started to click was the middle of last year, and that's when I signed up to do the charity MMA fight, was in October last year. And I just said to myself, I need to get back doing exercise. I need something that I need to make myself stick with. So that was my focus. And it wasn't about the fighting. It was about the 8 weeks training. And because it was for charity, there was no excuse not to go. You have to go. And I knew that if I built up that routine, I would keep on doing it, which I am. So
so you built in that accountability, those rails. You'll disappoint yourself, but you're not going to disappoint all the people that you promised or committed to.
Exactly.
That too. The other thought that I had is I'm curious, because I was put on citalopram as well, because the ADHD medication created full-blown anxiety in me. And I think I took maybe 2 pills and I said, this is not going well. And I stopped. And so I'm wondering, do you think your anxiety that it sounds like you still struggle with it a little bit. Do you think that could have been caused by this medication, or did you experience anxiety before? Because I've often said that, wait a minute, I don't have anxiety. I cause anxiety, in other people. And I still have a little bit of it. It'll rear its head up when I get really anxious about a deadline or, if I have to speak so I'm curious how that goes for you.
I have like 2 kind of points of view on that. So the first one is that I think just generally I'm quite naturally, regardless of whether it's to do with ADHD, I am quite an anxious kind of person. Like I'm a worrier. I've always been a worrier. Like when I first saw the ADHD psychiatrist that diagnosed me, he gave me like loads of tips to be like, how have you done all this without having your ADHD diagnosed and like with everything that's happened? And it was kind of like I found workarounds that I didn't even know were workarounds. So I like overplan because I know that I'm going to worry. So I overplan. And I think that medication specifically probably didn't cause my anxiety, because for me, it was more like, it was kind of like somebody on, it's hard to explain. I've never felt like that without being on some form of tablet. It was almost like, not euphoric because that's the wrong word, but it was just kind of like laughing gas. I was so spaced out, like I can't explain it. But no, there wasn't anxiety. But from what you
And
said
even
about,
on that, you were able to perform as well as you did in
yeah, I
school.
know, it's just weird.
Wow.
But like what you said about having, when you started to have like the medication for ADHD, like
Mm-hmm.
when I was given, like, recently I've tried out non-stimulant medication.
Mm-hmm.
That was awful. Like my coping strategies, like you wouldn't necessarily know unless you knew what to look for anxiety, that I struggle with anxiety. Like I do quite
Mm-hmm.
well with it. And unless something, like you said, something really bad's coming up, I kind of self-contain it. But this medication, I knew the side effects would be bad, and I knew that they would like give it some time to kind of like get in your system and start working. I just couldn't, like, within about 2 days, my boyfriend was like, "Are you sure this is all right? Like, you sure this is supposed to be happening?" And I
Mm-hmm.
just felt so, I felt completely depleted in energy, and I just felt miserable and worried, and just like my brain was just going off in, it was slower, but it was just like horrible tangents of like negativity, and just like I couldn't go and do exercise because I had no energy. And yeah, I think that kind of anxiety definitely can be caused by medication.
Wow. We were communicating back and forth a couple weeks ago, and you said, that you were going to try the ADHD medication. You wanted to see what
Yeah.
happened. And your response back to me after trying it was, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I've had a few days on stimulants before too, and I was so for them. But I've realized with both medications, for me, they feel controlling. It sounds very hippie, but I have lived with myself long enough to know that I will miss those parts of me on medication. And I'm slowly beginning to like myself quite a bit. I feel proud of what I've achieved, and to tell any part of that brain that it isn't good enough or normal or doesn't fit would be an insult to how much it has managed to achieve. Every time, this is the second time now that I've read that out loud because, we had our one failed episode, or I get goosebumps when I say that. So you must really get goosebumps when you wrote it.
Well, I do quite a lot of writing. Like I have typically, another thing that should have made sent alarm bells. I have so many hobbies. Like one of them is writing. Like I written poetry since I was a kid, and I like creative writing and stuff. And I just like words, and that wasn't meant to be like that. But when you read it back, I do kind of understand where you're coming from. But I get frustrated with my brain sometimes. But now that I understand like why it does things that it does. But I was like, I've lived with it for 27 years, so at least I know the things that it struggles with and I can help it. And I do think that if I didn't have the brain that I have, I wouldn't have necessarily got through some of the stuff that I've got through in my life. So yeah, I think that having tried the non-stimulant medication, I just don't think, I think it just completely saps all of my energy, and I don't want to do anything, and that's just boring. And I don't like boring. And then for me, the stimulant medication, yeah, it makes me more organized and it makes me more focused. But again, I have like this fire in my belly sometimes, and me and my boyfriend speak about it. And I don't know if it's an ADHD thing, but I know that a lot of my friends with ADHD have kind of spoken of a similar thing that they get. Like you can listen to a song and like it will fire you up, and you can think about something that you're really passionate about and it gets you fired up. And when you're on the medication, I just feel like I don't get that. And it's like you don't, and it's kind of like you can be scared, but you can be excited, and it just feels like it takes that away from you, I think. And as much as it has benefits, I just think that that's a really sad thing to get rid of when it's served you so well.
I couldn't agree more. I call it drivenness.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, where there's just, you just know. I mean, a neurotypical person would look at what you want to accomplish and they would probably think, oh my gosh, you need to come down to earth here. But for those of us who experience that, it's just this idea that it doesn't matter what it takes. If I do it one step at a time, I'm going to get there. I know I'm going to get there.
Yeah, well, it's
And
like
sometimes,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, like, the typical example of that was that fight, because I've, in the past year, just lost 5 stone, and I hadn't fought even in, like,
how much is 5 stone in pounds? Do you have any
um,
idea?
so a stone is 14 pounds.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
That's a lot of weight. That's like 60 pounds. Wait,
Yeah,
I'm
so
so
it's
bad
five
with
stones.
math.
So I was like 14, I was 14 and a half when I actually plucked up the courage to weigh myself. And then when I weighed myself, like the middle of this year, I was like 9 stone 7 or something like that. So yeah, about the same, about 5 stone.
No, I can't do math. I'm like Barbie when it comes to math. It's 70
Yeah.
pounds. And you lost that amount of weight in what amount of time? How far down were you when you decided I'm going to do this MMA fight?
I started swimming again, like trying, like going, I need to do something, I need to do something. And that was about March time last year. And then I signed up for the fight in October. So I reckon I'd lost about 1.5 to 2 stones. So that's like what, 40, it's about under 24 pounds, about 24 pounds.
Uh-huh.
And then I just was like, and then so I went to my boyfriend, I come home to my boyfriend and I was just like, I've done something today and I'm not sure how you're going to feel about it. And he was like, looked at me and he was like, what have you done? Because he knows what I'm like. And I said, so, you know, that boxing charity fight they had a few months ago? And he's like, yeah. I said, well, I signed up for an MMA one. And he's like, okay. And he's like, so you're going to, when is it? Like I said, like in 2 months time. And he's like, right, okay, so you haven't fought for years and you're like there, like really overweight, and you're going to do this fight in December. Yeah, definitely, 100%, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
And you did it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that is absolutely amazing. And I'm sure a lot of that weight was because of all the medication they had you
Yeah,
on.
100%, 100%.
You know, beyond the fact, and I'm sure the medication then affects how how you just are in the world in terms of, do you even want, to work out?
Mm-hmm.
Oi. Okay. So I want to ask you a couple questions about your childhood.
Okay.
So now that you look back, are there symptoms that you exhibited as a child that you can now say, oh yeah, that was ADHD?
Yeah, loads. Now I know what I'm looking for. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And what would they be?
massively erratic sleep routine. So I was, as a baby from 2 weeks old, I didn't sleep. Like I know babies don't sleep like very well, but I was a massive problem. I think, like I remember people put me down for like naps and stuff as like an older toddler, and they just couldn't get me to go to sleep. And it was just like I would be up doing something that I wanted to do. So I would be reading or I would be watching a TV program that I was absolutely obsessed with. Like I could just stay up because if I was interested in something, I would just be interested in it, and that was that. Like you couldn't stop me from doing it. So
Hyper focus as a baby.
yeah, well, not as a baby, but like as a very small child, like it wasn't necessarily hyperactive, but it was definitely hyper focused in the sense that I would be. So when I was 5, I got a bike for my birthday, and there's like a little small road out the front of my house. And I remember just riding this bike up and down this line of road until I could ride it without my stabilizers, like just falling off and getting back on again and going up and down. So hyper focus was definitely there. I think as well, as I got older, I definitely had, now I look back on it, kind of ADHD meltdown, in the sense of when I was not understood properly, I used to get very, very frustrated. So I wasn't a bad child. I wasn't a naughty child. I was actually like kind of one of the kind of good ones at school. Like I was never really in trouble, but I would walk out of classrooms and I would have arguments with teachers. Like I would be like, well, why can't it be this? And it would be like, because of this. And I'm like, yeah, but why? Like, I don't understand. Like, what's wrong with my answer?
Right.
Like, and then that would be seen as quite aggressive, but I never meant it that way. I just wasn't getting the answer. Like, I didn't understand why my perspective was, it was just looking at things from different angles to people, and then feeling like I was being kind of no. And I was like, but why? So I think that as well.
Well, and it's very clear that for those of us with ADHD, if we don't know why we have to do something, especially students, we can't do it.
No, because you think if you tell me exactly it, like if you tell me there's 10 rules, I'll go, that's perfectly fine, as long as you can explain to me why we have to do it this way, that's fine. But otherwise, I'm like, but surely this way is easier, or surely this way is more effective. Otherwise, I'm just not going to do it. So
You were also in the gifted and talented programs at school too,
Yeah, that's what I
right?
mean. Like, I wasn't a bad child. Like, I did love like
Mm-hmm.
learning. It sounds really stupid, but I do love learning things. I love like picking up new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when I pick something up, I want to be better than everybody else at it. Like, it's horrible, but I'm really competitive. But it was just I was I was on the gifted and talented program, and then I would be in a classroom and I would be sitting next to a student. I remember it was always that I talked too much, and I remember one of my teachers turning around to me saying, she said, "You," what she said? She said, "You forget. Emma has this amazing talent to be able to talk and do her work at the same time. She forgets that not everybody else in the classroom has this talent." So, yeah, it was just, I don't think I realised it at the time, but now looking back on it with those kind of knowing what I'm looking for, I probably was a little bit disruptive, but never intentionally. But it was just that I wasn't kind of focused enough, and I wasn't like, the classroom wasn't made for my brain, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense to me. So what were the ADHD symptoms that you had that you can now look and say, okay, that's me, but they were different than, the classic hyperactive ADHD symptoms. So the things that you overlooked and never thought, oh, maybe it's me, it's ADHD.
So when I'm very, very disorganized and forgetful, but I thought that I was very organized. But then I say, I've now realized that it's the fact that I've put strategies in place to make myself organized.
Yes.
So one of the things that the doctor said to me was like, how are you late for stuff all the time? And I was like, no, like, I'm always early, like, I'm always mega early for stuff. And then, because everyone's like, ADHD people are always late, they're never on time. And I was like, no, I'm always like an hour early, like, always. And then he was like, well, obviously ADHD often have time blindness, like, and I said, well, that's easy. Like, I set, since I get up in the morning to when the time I'm supposed to leave, I set an alarm every 10 minutes, so I know what time it is. And he's like, oh, so you're already doing that? And I was like, yeah, like, isn't that how everyone gets ready to go to work in the morning? He's like, no, people get up and they know what time they leave. And I was like, oh, okay. And then write in non-exhaustive lists of just, I had a massive whiteboard that I used to use of kind of things that where it was all color coded and stuff, and it made me feel organized to kind of rub stuff off. But like, these lists are now in my phone, so like, literally, because my phone is usually on me, I can just write it down because I know I have no short-term memory. So I'll go, right, I need to write that down later on my whiteboard, but I'll forget, so it goes in my phone. And then, like, for example, tonight with this podcast, for us recording, like, I knew that if I got too busy or something come up, I would forget. So I then last night put in a reminder to check the microphone. Like, I've been putting that reminder in my phone since the last time we spoke, that I need to set my laptop up and check the mic. But like, at times when I know that I'll be free, so that it reminds me. And then, like, it's just, so that's really helpful. And then also, like, now where I'm just talking and talking and talking and just talking, but also
I think it's brilliant.
but yeah, like, the way that it's really nice, actually, the way that me and my boyfriend have the same diagnosis, we can actually like laugh about it a lot more, I think, because we do have these conversations where we'll start off at one point and end up like, and then 10 sidetracks later, it's like, how did we get from here to here in like 5 minutes? And it's just, we can laugh at it a lot more. And like, how your sense of humor can be quite dark because your brain thinks on different tangents. And yeah, it's just, some of it's really positive and some of it's not so positive, but like, the way we can discuss it, like, we both present different. Like, if you met us as people, we're very different people, but when you break it down to like diagnostic criteria, you can go, yeah, they both do this, but they both do it in a completely different way.
Absolutely. So what advice, in closing, I don't want to keep you any longer, you've been so generous. In closing, if there is a young woman, or any woman, frankly, sitting here listening to this, she's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but she just feels like, it's not the right diagnosis. Or the converse is, she's been diagnosed with ADHD and she feels like there's something else. Because, a lot of times, well, ADHD is a comorbid condition. And so there are, definitely situations where you can have both ADHD and bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
So what are the differences between the two of them that they need to look for to distinguish which one it is, if it's one or the other?
So I think with ADHD over bipolar disorder, the fast pace of your brain is constant. So regardless of whether you're happy or sad, it's still fast and it still jumps around quite a lot. Unless you're hyper focusing, even then it still moves quite fast, just doesn't move as fast from one thing to the other. So that can be one thing that you compare it to. If you had bipolar disorder, you would be slowing down in a depression and then speeding up towards a hypomania mania kind of state. If you feel a shift in tempo, I would say that that's maybe an indication that there might be a bipolar disorder. Also, bipolar patients often have like stable periods where they don't feel up or down. So you would feel like that flow different, I suppose. With ADHD, if you're finding that you do have like ups and you do have downs, it would also depend on how long or short they are. So if you find, I know you can get rapid cycling bipolar disorder, but I know that that's quite different. But if you're finding that these episodes, for want of a better word, so if you're ADHD and you get frustrated, you'll be angry for half an hour. If you're bipolar and you're manic or hypomanic, that can last for weeks. And the same with the depression. Like if you're upset and you're ADHD and you're moaning and miserable, it's a short amount of time. And I think another thing as well is to notice how the pattern goes. Like if you're ADHD and you do a lot, and me and my partner are speaking about this quite a lot, like you don't know when to stop sometimes. So you keep going and going and going, and then you get the burnout. And sometimes that can feel quite depressing. But the difference, so if you've got going really fast and then suddenly dropping, that's more likely to be an ADHD thing because it's circumstance that's made that happen. It's environmental. So you've had a lot of stress and you've pushed yourself, so your body does need to crash. Whereas bipolar, it doesn't matter as much on external factors or outside stressors. It's just the chemical imbalance, so it just happens when it happens.
Yeah.
Whereas with ADHD, if there's been a shift in an emotion or in a mood or kind of a behavior, you can usually kind of attribute that to something outside of your brain that's happening, that's affecting you. So I think that's a key thing as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's so scary because 70% of bipolar patients, I can't believe this, are misdiagnosed at least once. And on average, and we found this out in our group because when I posted, several women said, well, let me tell you what the statistic is first. On average, patients with bipolar disorder, they wait a whopping 17 years before receiving an accurate diagnosis. And when I posted this in our group, there were several women who literally cited 17 years, which was crazy.
I noticed as well the ones that when you spoke about the fact that we were going to speak about this today about bipolar and ADHD, and the amount of women underneath that post saying this happened to me or this happened to my friend. And I was just like, wow, because when this happened to me and I went and spoke to the doctor about it, I was just like, everyone's going to think I'm crazy. Like, everyone's going to be like, she's having an episode and what's wrong with her? Like, this is stupid. And I don't think if it was the fact that I didn't have ADHD that I wouldn't have been able to do that, because I would have just talked myself down from it. But I was like, I know it's a gut feeling and I'm going with it. And I know that I'm right, so I'm going to find the evidence to show that I'm right. But it's just so sad to hear that that's happened to so many people, because it's such a sad and lonely place when you don't know what to do and you'll think that you're the only person that's happened to, and you're not.
It's just, it's unbelievable. Yeah. It's heartbreaking, actually. And I think about the women, and of course men as well, children who, are either not diagnosed or they're misdiagnosed. So anyway, I really, really appreciate your spending time with us. I'm curious, what do you do now
for work? So I have a really complicated job. It's a very boring / complicated job. So I basically am a mitigation coordinator. So I deal with kind of claims to do with tree damage to properties, but I'm the person that kind of deals with all the different parties. So I'll deal with the policyholders and the insurers and the loss adjusters and the solicitors, and I'm just kind of that go-between liaising person that tries to do the best thing that they can to get everything to go through and get people to remove their trees so that damage doesn't happen to property.
And so is that what you want to do long term, Em? It doesn't sound like you.
I've been, and I did realize this was another thing that made me kind of look at ADHD, was that quite a lot of ADHD people, unless they know what they want to do, they constantly job hop because they have a lot of ideas and they have a lot of interest and they're good at like different things, but they can't decide or they're not sure. And that's literally just been me. Like, I've done so many different jobs. I've been a teacher, I've been a paralegal, like I've worked in a call center. Like, I just am not really sure. And at the moment, I'm just kind of still working on myself and working myself out and getting myself in a good headspace. I'm really enjoying stuff outside of work. So the fact that I have a job that I know I can do and that is not stressful and that I can just go to work, do a little bit of like feeling like I've achieved something and then go home and do what I want to do outside of work, that's working for me at the moment. So I'm happy with that until I've made a decision.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Okay, Em, thank you so much again for sharing your knowledge here with us today. Now, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
So I'm in the Facebook group. I'm on there under Emma Elizabeth Megan, which is my Facebook name, which is what you have on here. And I'm also on Instagram, which is at Odd Socks, but without a C, because the C was taken. So it's at ODD SOKS is the Instagram tag as well.
Okay. And we'll put that all in the show notes. Thank you so much. Absolutely. So that's what we have for you today. As always, you're listening to ADHD for Smartass Women. If you like this episode with Megan, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal, is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work and discover their amazing strengths. Your reviews, they really help us in that regard. Also, if you have a comment, a guest you'd like me to interview, or a topic idea for this podcast, you can go to my website at tracyotsuka.com and leave me an audio message or reach out to me at tracyotsuka.com. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week. And again, all of the links that we talked about, they will be posted in the show notes. You've been listening to the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka, and we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you liked what you heard, we sure would appreciate a review. And not coincidentally, ADHD for Smartass Women, well, that's also the name of our free Facebook group. Go look it up. We're a totally smartass community of successful, ambitious women who share our ADHD wins, questions, and workarounds. We'd love to have you join us. You can also find all my details over at tracyotsuka.com. Don't forget, I spy a happier life for us, and I'll see you again next week.